to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our daily flagship show, The Gist. On The Gist, joining us live from Moscow is Anton Anisimov, is the Editor-in-Chief of Sputnik International. Здравствуйте, добрый вечер, Anton Sergeyevich. Thank you so much for giving us some time on StratNews Global.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Straight away, I want to get into your assessment now. It's 3 weeks since President Putin announced on February 24th what he calls special military operations. The rest of the world calls a war and an invasion. But your assessment of the position on the ground, did the Russian military and the government overestimate their strength or underestimate the resistance there?
Okay, so I think we're talking about a popular misconception, was better described as imagination failure, coming from some of the Western media outlets who presumed that I think that Russia would have wanted to finish the military operation within 3 days or 4 days or something like that. We need to remember, when speaking about this, that Ukraine is Europe's second biggest country, second to Russia. And also its military capabilities are among the top tier in Europe at this moment. So I think it's kind of obnoxious to even suggest that Russia expected this to be over in a matter of days. So as for this part of the narrative that Russia has underestimated its capabilities or Ukraine's capabilities, I don't think we can just state it so, brazenly, because we need to understand that this operation is going to take time, and everybody from the get-go here in Russia, at the very least, knew that this operation was going to take time, because we're not speaking about simply bombing the entire country. Russia is not using its military capabilities to their full extent, as you might understand. So it's more of it's a combination of a military operation with a humanitarian mission, and the humanitarian part is what makes it so hard. Really, it's what makes it. It's why this operation is taking this long as of now, because we see, like, here in Russia, people see Ukraine as their brotherly nation. Like, the people of Ukraine are brotherly nation to Russians. We have many, people in Russia have many relatives living in Ukraine, and vice versa. And as you may well know, many Ukrainians migrate to Russia. We're not talking about seasoned workers, but also like full-scale migration. And it's been happening. It's been going on for years now. So I think this is, like, to the largest extent, this humanitarian part is the reason why the operation is taking this much time.
In terms of the objectives that was stated, and everybody around the
I
globe
cannot
has
hear
heard
you.
what... Can you hear me now?
Cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Is it any better now?
Oh, yes, it is better. Thank you.
I was just saying, in terms of the objectives that President Putin had laid out on February 24th, everyone around the world has heard the speeches that he made and given the history. Have those objectives changed in any manner? I mean, what were the objectives? Was a government change ever an objective?
No. Government change was never an objective. I mean, it's like throughout the last years, it was pretty hard having a constructive dialogue with the Ukrainian regime, especially for their Russian counterparts, for Russia's president. But at the same time, from the get-go, it was stated that Russia is not seeking regime change in Ukraine. That we see Russia sees President Zelensky as a legitimate president of Ukraine. And the only three objectives that had been stated and have been repeated many, many times is the denazification of Ukraine, demilitarization of Ukraine, Ukraine's neutral status, as if we speak in relation to the NATO participation in the NATO alliance, and also the end of genocide in the eastern part of Ukraine. So these are the main objectives, and establishing a proxy regime in Ukraine was never a goal. I mean,
Anton, I'm
at
just
the very
gonna
least, yeah. I mean, at the
yeah,
at
no,
the very least, it was not mentioned.
complete what you're saying.
Yes, I mean, at the very least, it wasn't stated at the beginning of the operation. And I'm not saying that after what has happened, after the catastrophe that the Ukrainian regime led its country into, that President Zelensky is going to stay. We cannot be certain about that, but we can say for certain that the regime change is not an issue. It's not a goal of the military operation that's being conducted now.
Right. I'm just going to take a couple of our viewer comments. Salvatore Bobones, who's actually Anton, an American, but he's a US professor in Australia. He says, thanks, StratNews Global, for bringing us the Russian perspective. And there's another one from Jaydeep Galawi, who says, thanks a lot, StratNews Global, for this one. Just getting back to the conversation, Anton, Russia swears by international law and the UN Charter. In this day and age, how can a country, I mean, I know it's called a special military operation in Russia, but how can a country invade or cross into a sovereign other country? How is that justified?
Now, this one is a complicated question. Like, first, I would like to refer to the terms that people are using, because I know that it's been called a war, like a full-blown war between Russia and Ukraine, but a state of war has never been declared by either Russia or Ukraine. Neither of the sides has openly declared a war on one another. And if it was a war, I'm saying that Russia is not really using its military capabilities. I just repeat myself. Russia is not using its military capabilities to their full extent. We're not having a general mobilization here in Russia. Russia has around 145 million people living in the country. And for the majority of the people, the life goes normally, just like it used to before the beginning of the operation. Of course, everybody is emotionally invested in what's happening in Ukraine. It's our close neighbor with very, very, our cultures and our histories are very tightly intertwined throughout history. So, but saying that it is a war would be an overstatement. It is not, like, officially, it is not a war. War is the legal term. It's not a matter of perception, of individual perception by any viewer. So the other thing about the invasion, now, just to expand on this, there's, like, the conflict didn't really start 3 weeks ago. It's been happening in the Donbass region, in the eastern part of Ukraine, for the last 8 years. There were and there have been military Nazi battalions operating in the eastern part of Ukraine. And the funniest part about this is that everybody knows this. I mean, you can Google an article and find articles written by The Guardian or Reuters or some of the Canadian press or news outlets like The Intercept or The Vice, which are pretty big household names. And they all have been writing about Nazi battalions operating in Ukraine, but somehow just nobody really cared. As of now, Russia's investigation committee, head investigation committee, says it has at least 14,000 cases of confirmed genocide cases against Russian-speaking population in the eastern part of Ukraine. So I understand that the world sees this as a military operation conducted by Russia. It's only like 3 weeks old, but what's really been happening is the genocide part was going on for at least 8 years there in the eastern part of Ukraine. And we're speaking about Russian-speaking community. And Russia has been repeating many times that we will protect Russian-speaking people if we see it necessary. And it was necessary because many people have been dying. Like many people are dead by now.
Right. President Zelensky, who you say Russia recognizes as the legitimate president, has just had a live virtual address to the US Congress where he got a standing ovation. I just wanted to get your sense or your assessment. Is Russia, is President Putin, is the government surprised by the swiftness and the severity of US-led Western sanctions and how most of the world has followed that.
So, well, it's hard for me to say if there are surprised, because what we're hearing from the top brass of our country is that they've been prepared for a variety of responses, and as of now, everything goes more or less according to plan. If we're speaking about sanctions, especially the Western sanctions imposed on Russia in the recent days and weeks, I wouldn't say that here within the country, inside the country, you're feeling the impact just now. Everybody's bracing for it, and everybody, I think, understands that it's going to have an impact, but it'll probably come later, like a few weeks later, perhaps. So another misconception that I think everybody's getting is that Western sanctions mean that every Western company is leaving the Russian market. But when we're speaking about Russia, Russia is the biggest country in Europe, if we're speaking population-wise. So it's a very, very big market. And we've been hearing from many Western companies, from companies that work in other countries, that their main problem now is the national currency rate, which makes imported goods hard to sell within Russia. And their second biggest problem as of now is the disruption of logistics. Well, basically, a lot of goods were coming through the territory of Ukraine and Belarus, but they're now there is a military operation happening in Ukraine, and Belarus is under sanctions. So it's very hard to deliver goods here to Russia. So for many companies, for many Western companies working here in Russia, we've heard that they are now trying to adjust, and so they temporarily stopped their operations in the country, but by no means they are ready to leave the market completely.
Right. I'm just going to take some more comments from our viewers and questions for you, Anton. You've answered one of them, but I'm just going to take it up on the screen. What's the situation in Russia currently? What effect have the sanctions had on ordinary Russians? You said as of now, the impact hasn't really been felt. It'll probably be felt down the line. But here's another tough one. Nakshatra Roy says, the beating Russia's military is receiving by the hands of the Ukrainian military is unprecedented. 4 generals of the Russian forces have been killed, plus another Chechen general. I mean, there is a lot of analysis of how much wanted military superpower Russia, that is doing in these operations. If you would like to, elaborate on that.
Okay, sure. So as far as the figures are concerned, we need to double check it, because Russia's been very open about the number of casualties that we've been having. We're talking hundreds of servicemen lives lost as of now. So nobody says that there are no losses on the Russian side. Definitely not Russia's Ministry of Defense says that. But we're now saying that the Russian military is taking the beating. I mean, if you look at the map and just see the way Russian troops are advancing, like Melitopol, the city of Melitopol has been taken. The entire Kherson Oblast, like Kherson region, is under Russia's control. Mariupol has been unblocked, and now humanitarian corridors are established, and people can finally leave the city of Mariupol. Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, is basically besieged. A number of cities in the eastern part and the northern part, and as well as like southern part of the country, have been either surrounded or have already surrendered. So taking a beating, well, it is an overstatement, because what we're hearing from the Russia's Ministry of Defense, and there's basically no reason for us here in Russia to disregard what they're saying, because there are many Russian war correspondents on the ground, and we just get reports from certain cities, from certain locations, and from certain places, and we can see it with our own eyes that this territory is basically under Russia's control. And again, then again, just one minor thing. I would like to say once again that we're talking about a military operation conducted on the territory of Europe's second biggest country that also has Europe's second biggest army. So if nobody expected this to be like a walk in the park. Everybody knew that this is going to be a tough operation. So, yeah.
Again, going into the history, as you were mentioning, in terms of the Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk and 14,000 people who've died there in the last 8 years, being one of the reasons why Russia has chosen to act. But again, you're saying it's not an invasion, not a war in terms of legal connotation, but why would the Russian military then need to besiege, as you said, the capital Kyiv? Why would they have to fire on Lviv in the extreme west if the focus is only on the Donbass?
That is a good question. But if you remember what happened back in 2008 when Georgia attacked the breakaway republics of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and later on, like late years on, the OSCE, the European organization, admitted that it was Georgia who attacked first, so Russia had to respond. If you just deal with the eastern part of Ukraine, there are certainly troops and there is certainly military equipment that will be coming from the western part. So the conflict would drag on and just continue forever. What Russian military has been doing, and it started like on the very first day, Russia's airstrikes were targeting military facilities, and only military facilities, as a matter of fact, were targeting airfields and military bases. Now, the pictures that we're seeing from the cities, with cities being shelled, that is the biggest problem, because the Nazi battalions that I've talked about, and once again, you can Google them, the Azov Nazi battalion is very notorious. And the Western media has been writing about it for years now. And as a matter of fact, the Western media has been saying that the Azov battalion poses a grave threat to the Ukrainian regime itself, because they're basically out of control, and they're basically like their chevron. They have this chevron on their shoulder, which is an exact mirror image of the 2nd Tank Division Waffen-SS back in the times of World War II. So this is just how bad it is. So what's happening now is the Nazi battalions, and I'm speaking like true Nazi battalions, brandishing swastikas and whatnot, they've confined themselves within the big cities, and we have numerous proofs that they're hiding in kindergartens, they're hiding in schools and hospitals. They are establishing their bases in hospitals and schools. So basically putting civilian population as their shield up front and hiding and shooting from behind their backs. So many this, like, if we're speaking about footage of civilian facilities and the infrastructure being destroyed, most of it is done by the Nazi battalions themselves. I mean, it's their aim, because that is the picture that you're getting afterwards, that Russia is an obnoxious country which is bombing hospitals for no reason whatsoever. But there is a reason, because like there are Nazi battalions hiding in there, and I'm saying we have numerous proofs of that. So we can prove it, like with videos and photographs taken by themselves.
And the Azov battalion is part of the Ukraine National Guards. I mean, officially, even before what had happened.
Yes.
But Anton, just wanted you to go into what a certain section of, say, the Western or the Indian or foreign analysis is about NATO's expansion. You know, I mean, you can go all the way into history post the dissolution of the Soviet Union or the breakup of the Soviet Union. But that as a major security concern doesn't seem to be of late. I mean, being repeated by the, of course, not from President Putin, by Sergei Lavrov or anybody else. This question of neutrality, or Ukraine neutrality, and NATO expansion, if you want to just expand on that.
Okay, sure. Now imagine that you're having the world's biggest political and military alliance right on your borders. And the worst part about this is, in NATO documents, and from what their Secretary General is stating, that Russia is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, threat to the alliance. At the same time, like throughout history, we can see that in the past 50 years or so, NATO has been expanding towards Russia. So this expansion, this sort of weird entropy, is happening. Is not conducted by Russia. Russia is not moving towards NATO, but NATO is moving towards Russia. And we're talking supplying countries with military equipment that potentially put to harm can potentially put to harm Russia's population. And at some point, I mean, NATO was originally something like an anti-Soviet bloc, political and military bloc, but the Soviet Union is no more. And even after the Soviet Union dissolved, NATO continued its expansion. It's actually right on our borders now. I mean, in countries like in Baltic states, some of the Baltic states are NATO members, and they're right on our border. So now the worst part about Ukraine would be, imagine having the Nazi battalions and NATO equipment. Well, basically what they have now, but imagine like multiply it tenfold. If Ukraine at some point joins NATO and NATO can freely provide Ukraine with lethal equipment, with lethal weapons, imagine having a country like that on your border with, basically the Nazi battalions, of course, but also the rhetoric that Kiev regime has been practicing throughout the last years, that Russia is the enemy. That's basically the main political narrative in Ukraine. So it is, yeah.
President Zelensky has gone on record to say, the idea of joining NATO, he's cooled off on. The talks that are going on, continuing at least, that is a good sign between Russia and Ukraine, where I think Sergei Lavrov has talked about neutrality and maybe Kyiv's neutrality and other issues. So at least in terms of a compromise. But the flip side of that argument, Anton, is that even if this situation ends or is resolved, however it is resolved, and we don't know how it is, the countries around which are not part of NATO, their only focus now is to be in NATO, so that's something that, like what happened to Ukraine, doesn't happen to them.
Okay, sure. But the thing is, most countries that are willing or not willing to become NATO are not that Russophobic as the current Ukrainian regime. They do not have Nazi battalions. They do not have Nazi type military on their territory. So it is it's a legitimate right for every nation to become part of either bloc to their liking. But at the same time, we're talking Ukraine, where at least but certainly a large part of the population will be against NATO. Like the eastern part of Ukraine, which has historically been very, very tightly connected to Russia, would definitely be against them. So, and basically this is what is happening in the eastern part of Ukraine as well. I mean, the part that is not in line with what the official Kiev regime is saying right now, their opinions are not even heard. Their opinions are bombed, actually, along with people that are voicing them. So I think it is exactly Ukraine that is the big deal with the biggest concern if Ukraine joined NATO. I don't think it's
if Finland or Sweden join.
Yeah, I don't think it's true to the same extent as it will be with Ukraine.
Absolutely. I get what you're saying. What's the mood among the people or people you speak to, or since you are an editor-in-chief, you would have access to a larger viewpoint in terms of the stakes that have been raised so much? I mean, there's talk of World War III. President Putin raised the nuclear alert. The NATO says not a square inch. If anything happens to any of our countries, Chapter 5 will be invoked. President Putin says, if anybody tries to stop me, there'll be consequences that you've never seen in history. I mean, if something goes wrong, say a Russian missile enters into NATO territory or a NATO country's territory, President Zelensky asking for a no-fly zone in the US Congress, that what's the worry like within Russia in terms of the magnitude of where the world is at right now?
Well, everybody's worried, of course. Everybody, not only in Russia, like in Europe as well. Everybody's worried about what might happen. I think even the United States, to some extent, people need to be worried about what might happen. What might happen. Um, as of Russia, as we're speaking of Russian rockets, I don't think there is a huge risk of Russia's high precision missiles and high precision ammunition to land somewhere in a European state or in the state of the NATO bloc that belongs to the NATO bloc. At least like in the last 3 weeks, nothing of that sort has happened even closely, because we're speaking about high precision weapons. But I think the most dangerous part now, as you've mentioned, President Zelensky speaking to the US Congress and asking the United States to establish a no-fly zone, which everybody knows by now, and I think it's been admitted by both Russian part, by both the Russian part and the United States part, that this could lead to a direct hit between Russia and NATO, and nobody wants that. Also, like Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, said that, of course, we hope that nobody's willing to start a nuclear war now, and basically the same has been voiced by the United States. Well, up until now, up until this moment, at the very least, that nobody's willing to start a nuclear war. That's why it's so dangerous. Like what President Zelensky is suggesting is that NATO and Russia should collide over Ukraine, should have a military, like, risk a military warfare in between them over Ukraine. And now, even speaking as a president, like what kind of a president would want a military confrontation between NATO and Russia on its soil, like on Ukraine's soil? He's a Ukrainian president. Does he even think about the people living in Ukraine, really?
Well, that's something that I can go on about, but I want to get your views on a few other subjects as well. If you could elaborate on the Russia-China relationship, and certain reports even suggesting that Russia has already asked for military aid, for drones or military equipment, even rations for soldiers, which is an indication of how badly it's going, some analysts put it. The Russia-China equation, how do you see that playing out in this whole conflict when the whole world financially is trying to push you into a corner?
Okay, so now, like speaking about the whole world that's trying to push us into a corner, I think that is also an overstatement, because it's a very popular misconception that when we speak about the whole world, we're often speaking about Europe and the United States, but that's not the whole world. I mean, the whole world is way, way bigger. So the other thing about Russia asking China for military help, that never really happened, and that's been stated by Russian officials.
Okay.
Russia is not, as just once again, Russia is not using its full military potential in the conflict in Ukraine, in the military operation in Ukraine. So it wouldn't need to rely on China to help it in any way. Matter of fact, we have, and it's also being mentioned that there are at least 16,000 people from the Middle Eastern countries that are willing to take part in the military operation on Russia's side. So if we're speaking that we are isolated from the entire world, I certainly don't think it is true. And as far as China's stance is concerned, I think it's been very balanced. They've been asking for a peaceful resolution to this conflict, which I think it's the only right way to finish the conflict. That's why Russia has been in talks with President Zelensky administrations, because basically President Zelensky right now, even though this is a problematic part. We don't think that President Zelensky is controlling his entire country. We don't think that President Zelensky is controlling basically the militia, the Nazi battalions that I've been talking about. So even if he says, even if he orders them to lay down their weapons, they probably wouldn't abide by what he says. They probably wouldn't listen to him, because they know that if they lay down their weapons, that the tribunal here in Russia is the only thing that awaits them, and they wouldn't want to do that. But at the same time, President Zelensky remains the only person in Ukraine right now who is somewhat like a legitimate president, who whatever he says has a nationwide meaning. So if we think for a second that there were no President Zelensky right now at speaking on behalf of Ukraine, Ukraine would be in chaos because you don't have any other figure to talk to. So yeah, a peaceful resolution, and what China's been asking is a peaceful resolution. We think it's a very balanced approach, and I
Just
think that
adding to
yeah.
the China question, Anton, I mean, financially, energy-wise, are there alternatives that China and Russia can do to, negate
Yeah.
the Western sanctions?
Yeah, we've been hearing that actually a lot. I think not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of using China's currency more in bilateral trade. And I think I just read yesterday on the Wall Street Journal that Saudi Arabia is considering doing the same when speaking about energy trade, and selling oil, perhaps switching to yuan, seeing what's happening. Because I think what I think is that the entire, not the entire world perhaps, but like in most parts of the world, people are watching not only the military operation itself, but also the sanctions that are being used in very tight coordination by Europe and the United States. So, and I think like many people are thinking that it could be Russia this time around, but sometime in the future, like you never know when the same might happen to any other country. Like no matter how big it is, we've seen it.
And we've seen the double standards of the West when it comes to sanctions, because on Iran, on Venezuela, there were maximum sanctions. But
Yeah.
now that Russia is the focus, there's talk of Iranian oil and Venezuelan oil, though, of course,
That is the game. Yeah.
Venezuelan trip. Just wanted your comments on India and its position. We've seen in the United Nations, whether it's the Security Council, the General Assembly, Human Rights Council, IAEA, India has abstained. There's reports suggesting that Russia has offered discounted gas or oil to India up to 27% if world crude oil prices go that much. And we saw an immediate response, or at least a response from the White House spokesperson yesterday when she was asked by a journalist what she thought about that. And she said, Jen Psaki said that there would be no sanctions on India if they went through with that deal. But she said every country needs to look at whether they're on the wrong side of history. Your thoughts on India and Russia and where that really puts us in the current situation?
Now, I think if we're speaking about Western sanctions now, we're starting about it. I mean, it's only logical that Russia starts looking elsewhere more actively to find new partnerships, to find new agreements, because we need to understand that Russia is a country that is like, it is, first of all, it is the biggest European market, if we speak like population wise. Then, of course, our country is very rich in natural resources. You just cannot take that away. So if to a certain extent Europe decides to abandon this market and to stop trade in some way, like one way or another, I think it's only natural that Russia is going to be looking elsewhere, looking to Asian countries, looking to also countries like India, looking more to African countries, because as our president stated, that we've been prepared for a variety of responses in regards to this military operation. And as of now, nobody's panicking. I mean, just people might get a feeling that it is complete chaos in Russia because McDonald's has shut down its restaurants here in Russia, or because Zara is no longer selling their, not no longer, but just stopped for a time being selling their clothes. But nobody's really panicking here. Everybody's looking for new opportunities. Everybody, well, at least people that I'm talking to are pretty optimistic in a way about what's happening.
But in terms of India, there are lots of worries because of the legacy military equipment that India has. About 80% of our armed forces are dependent on former Soviet and Russian equipment. That if for some reason Russia has to put off the tap, so as to speak, that it needs it for itself for these operations, or else the closeness that Russia and China become because of Western sanctions, that India could be in a very disadvantageous position. Your thoughts on that?
I don't think that India would be in a very disadvantaged position. I do understand the situation between India and China. It's been somewhat tense. But at the same time, Russia's been saying, like, my country's been repeating it many times, that we're open to dialogue and constructive partnership with any country, despite and we're speaking about this sort of partnership where the Russian side always leaves the political part out of it. For example, just in Afghanistan, when Taliban came to power, Russia is willing to try and build relations with Taliban as well, as long as they represent the population of the country, as long as they represent what the people of Afghanistan are wanting. So Russia, when speaking about economical agreement and economical partnerships, Russia is leaving politics out of this always. It just, like any agreement with Russia, it does not come with some political subtleties that you need to change your political course in a way that you need to accept, I don't know, you need to accept LGBT or you need to accept critical race theory. Nothing of that sort comes from Russia, never. So even if there are disagreements between India and China, as far as relations with Russia and economic relations and political relations with Russia are concerned, I don't think that they will be,
It will affect.
like in any way affected by somewhat disagreements between India and China.
Well, many would say that you're right, because even when there were deadly clashes between India and China, Russia never turned off any of the military equipment. In fact, gave India or whatever else it had asked. Just a question from 1 to 4, Just Madness. That's the YouTube name, Anton. Can sanctions again make Russia dependent on China? If that's the case, how will Russia navigate future economic directions, and will China have a disproportionate influence in Russia and Central Asia?
Does it say can once again make Russia dependent on China?
Yeah.
Oh, when was it dependent on China?
No, increasingly because of your tighter embrace because of the
Okay.
world situation, will it?
Oh, sure. Now, relations between Russia and China have been growing steadily throughout the past 20 years. I think ever since Vladimir Putin has come to power, relations with China have been, basically Russia has been on very, very good terms with China. And both leaders are now speaking about the level of partnership that's never been seen in bilateral history of both countries. So it's not a matter of dependence, because as you know, in this day and age, every country on this planet is somewhat interconnected with another. Now, for example, when prices go up in China, prices also go up, like production prices go up in China. Sales prices also go up in countries like the United States and many European countries, because China produces a lot of goods. At the same time, if energy prices go up in Russia and they're being sold by higher prices at higher prices, and also to China, Chinese prices might go up. So the global economy is pretty much interconnected right now. So we can say that we all are in a way dependent on one another. So this is why Russia's been saying that we really need to cooperate with Europe as well. I think President Putin said it somewhere in the early 2000 something. I don't remember the year of that. Russia was really looking forward to like a single economic space from Europe to Russia's Russia's farthest eastern parts. So Russia's been open for this sort of dialogue, and I think that this interconnection that the global economy now has, like with many countries being so dependent on one another, I think it is an opportunity really more than a setback. So it's not a matter if that we're going to be more dependent on China. Like like Russia will probably turn to China if the Western market is closed to a certain extent. It's only rational. I think the same might happen in other directions as well, we're talking about Southeast Asia and Africa and India, of course.
Right. If you want to wrap up your thoughts, Anton, in terms of, like we said, negotiations are continuing between both sides, and there have been some good statements that have come out from President Zelensky saying that they're more realistic. Sergei Lavrov saying that there are things on the table that Russia could possibly accept. In lieu of that, and wrapping up your thoughts, another comment question from Night Library: what does a compromise look like now, or is it even possible? What would you consider the biggest hurdle in direct Russia-Ukraine conflict resolute mechanisms? I mean, just a wrap of how optimistic or pessimistic are you that some kind of an international resolution to this can be reached?
I don't think like an international resolution is really necessary. I mean, to a certain extent, perhaps, but I don't think like first and foremost, there needs to be this needs to come to a conclusion between Russia and Ukraine. We're pretty optimistic as far as the military operation itself is concerned, but of course, everybody is willing, like at least on the Russian side, that the Kiev side accepts, the Ukraine side accepts the terms that Russia is willing to end the military operation with, and those are very basic. Those are demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, stopping the genocide, as well. So, and these are the terms that, as far as I've heard, like up until now, these are the terms that the Russian side will not neglect. These are the terms that the Kiev side needs to accept as they are right now. We certainly hope that some sort of compromise, or at least some sort of both parties can come to mutual understanding, because as I'm saying, everybody here in Russia is very emotionally invested in what's happening in Ukraine. So everybody wants this to end in peace as soon as possible. But the statements being made by Vladimir Putin, he's repeating that the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine are necessary parts of this agreement. Also, the end of genocide and the neutral status, they are the necessary part of this agreement, like potential agreement that Russia cannot overlook.
Антон Сергеевич Anisimov, очень приятно было говорить с вами online. Thank you so much. Спасибо за ваше время as well. And I think it's very important, especially in the current situation, that the perspective from Moscow also reaches to as many people as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you on StratNews Global, and you can follow our social media handles for the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. Some of our well-wishers have also requested a UPI payment to contribute and support us, and I'm putting that up on the screen. It's there in the YouTube descriptor as well. This is The Gist on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.